Hello mystery seekers and welcome to The Mystery is Served. Today we will talk about what really happened at the Titanic. We all got excited about the Titanic story and we are sorry about the tragic result. But what would you think if I said that the sinking of the Titanic was not a simple accident, but that it was a huge conspiracy and the cause of the sinking wasn't it an iceberg but a bomb inside the Titanic, like the Twin Towers? A conspiracy orchestrated by the New World Order to kill the richest men of the time and who were averse to the creation of the US Federal Reserve, since those who can control the monetary volume of a country and the world is the absolute master of the whole sector economic industrial. Let's start from the beginning. The early 20th century was marked by a crisis on the margins of the collapse of the US financial system, the worst event since the San Francisco earthquake of 1906. The disaster led a group of bankers, politicians and economists to meet secretly in 1910, under the pretext of a friendly meeting, on the island of Jekyll, in the state of Georgia, United States, with the intention of creating a sinister plan. This plan consisted of creating a large private banking superstructure that would subdue the rest of the banks in the United States. The third attempt would have been made. Two previous ones had already failed. This was designed by the owners of the banking cartel, the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, the servants of the Vatican Bank Morgan and Wahlberg, with their frontmen, had conspired to create it, to steal by lending non-existent money, spending only on ink and paper to print large amounts of dollars without supervision. This is called fiduciary money. The three Jewish magnates who opposed the creation of the Federal Reserve Note were Benjamin Guggenheim, a mining and metallurgical magnate, Isidoro Straus, owner of what are now the Macy's department stores, and finally John Jacob Astor IV, great-grandson of what is considered the first U.S. billionaire with military interests, successfully dedicated to the family real estate company and owner of the Empire State Building. The three were among the richest men in the world, but they represented an obstacle to the creation of the Federal Reserve. So J.P. Morgan financed and decided to build the largest ship in the world, the Titanic, to invite the most important opponents on a journey without return. They had thought of different ways to get rid of the strong opponents of the creation of the Federal Reserve, and it was decided that the best thing would be to provoke the biggest accident in history, to distract public opinion and also to destroy most of the rich of the earth, and to be able to do their business. The Titanic was a Trojan horse. The unsinkable ship, the floating palace, was created to be the tomb of the rich who opposed the Federal Reserve System. Over 100,000 people attended the inauguration and departure of the Titanic, and the biggest magnates were invited in all fields of finance and industry. Much J.P. Morgan, owner of White Star Line, like James P. Ryde, owner of the Harley and Wolff shipyards, refused to make the maiden voyage of the greatest work of their life. Although they usually always made the initial crossing of all their ships, J.P. Morgan cancelled his reservation, saying he was ill, which was false. Other important people cancelled their reservations at the last minute, like Robert Bacon, Henry Clay Frick, as well as numerous clerics and prelates in connection with the Jesuit order. A special event was played by the Van der Bright family, who, after having ordered the butler and housekeeper to prepare the room for the crossing and arrange the luggage, cancelled the tickets 10 minutes before setting sail, leaving all their belongings and personnel on board of service without giving any explanation. Is the cancellation of some millionaires invited to travel without return randomness incredible? I do not believe. The captain chosen for the Titanic's journey was Edward Smith, with 26 years of good service in the White Star Line, an excellent connoisseur of the route and used to sailing among icebergs. It was the last trip of his career, along with a good crew and above all with a splendid first officer, William Murdoch. After leaving Belfast, strange events began to happen. Edward Smith was the greatest navigational expert. However, he failed with the best constructed and equipped ship in history, the Titanic, which had the latest technology and was theoretically prepared to withstand the impact with ice blocks. How is it possible that at one time a ship built with state-of-the-art technological materials was torn open, when boats 3 times smaller and in worse conditions bear large storms and blocks of ice? It's weird, right? Moreover, the captain ordered to advance at all speed at 22 knots per hour on a cold and dark moonless night. Then he was alerted with late telegrams that the ship was going too fast, but he did nothing to realize it. News from other ships continued to arrive about the particular danger of the waters at night, as well as the presence of countless large icebergs. Did Edward Smith need warnings? No. He had crossed those waters for 26 years. He knew there were icebergs in that area. He appeared hesitant and downcast throughout the journey, struggling in his mind whether to fulfill his duty as a ship captain or obey his master who had ordered him to sink the ship. He was sworn in by the Jesuits. He had received the order to sink the Titanic, and this is exactly what he did. Edward Smith was a Jesuit coadjutor, meaning an unordered Jesuit, who maintained a total loyalty to the order until his death, although he was not a priest. This is the Jesuit oath. I must consider my body as a dead body, without will or intelligence, as a crucifix, which is delivered without resistance to the will of the one who guides it with a stick in his hand, who uses it as requested and as best he likes it. Officially, at 12:39 nighttime, the Titanic impacted an iceberg. After a suicidal maneuver, the Titanic was destined for shipwreck. Even in the tragic moment when it began to be devoured by the icy waters of the Atlantic, the strange facts did not stop happening. The lifeboats, in themselves insufficient to save all the passengers on board, began to leave the Titanic, plus 1 hour after the impact, practically empty. The Titanic began issuing emergency signals, but they were not the correct ones. Instead of throwing red flares, which indicate danger or requests for help in the naval code, those that were launched were white, indicating that there is a party on board. Even the radio messages from the Titanic were very strange. They did not begin to send distress signals until about 45 minutes after the impact. The consequence was that almost an hour of rescue time was wasted. No ship came to help. The first to arrive was the furthest, the Carpathia, owned by the rival company Cunard Line. It is inexplicable how the Californian, whose speed was 12 knots, took almost 4 hours to travel 11 miles, considering that Carpathia had traveled 58 miles at 17 knots in the same time frame and with the same sea conditions. Some survivors talked about an explosion inside the ship. Others said it was a fire that caused the sinking and not an iceberg. No gash was found during the long investigation, only 5 round holes of explosion from the inside to the outside under the water line. When the Titanic passed close to the iceberg, someone took the opportunity to blow up the charges it carried inside the hull. What really happened with the Titanic? What was the real reason for his sinking? Why were there so many negligences that ended up sending him to the bottom, losing so many lives? Final emphasis. There is no answer. All we know is that the Titanic sinks in 1912 and the U.S. Federal Reserve is created in 1913. 8 months later, in 1914, the Jesuits had sufficient funds through the Federal Reserve Bank to begin the First World War. The goal of this elite is to establish a single world currency, and a global government with a single religion is thus establishing the so-called New World Order. Who knows, maybe if the famous ocean liner hadn't sunk, the world we know would be very different from what it is today. Who is it that does not dream of a better world, in which governments and great powers do not manipulate us to their liking with the power that gives them money? That's all, dear friends. See you at the next video.